Hello and welcome to today's episode of Platinum Talks Wealth. Emmy-nominated journalist Jennifer Rogers Markwell changed gears in her television career when she realized the need to help women make sense of investing. She regularly hosts educational workshops to empower women and others to take charge of their financial future. Now, join your host, Platinum Wealth Management President Jennifer Rogers Markwell, as she leads us into the world of money memories, money infidelities, and how these can mold our relationship with our personal finances as adults. Let's dive into today's episode.
Hi, it's Jennifer Rogers Markwell, and you're joining us on the Platinum Talks Wealth podcast. Today, we're joined by Christine Luken. Christine, thank you so much for making time.
Thanks so much for having me.
So my big question I always ask first is tell me all about who you are and why you do what you do.
So I am known as the financial dignity coach. I have been coaching women, individuals, couples on their personal finances for over 16 years. But I don't do this because I've always handled my own money wisely. In fact, it is quite the opposite. I found myself in my mid-20s with my credit score in the toilet, owing a bunch of debt, having collectors calling me. And it wasn't because I didn't know what I should be doing. In fact, I was an accountant. I had an accounting degree. I was working for a multi-million-dollar manufacturing company as their staff accountant. And yet I was bouncing my own checks at home. I was parking my car a half a mile away from where I lived so the bank wouldn't come and tow it. A good part of the reason that I got myself in that situation was due to a toxic relationship, which I later learned was called codependency. My fiance at the time was not good with money at all. He was in and out of jobs, even in and out of jail. I thought if I just loved him enough that he would change, and he did. He got worse. We started dating when we were 18 and 19. And sure, back then, you were a teenager. You were in your early 20s. You do irresponsible things. You party. You have fun with your friends. You quit jobs that suck. But at some point, you have to grow up and be an adult. And I was more than ready for that, and he just was not along for the ride. And it was really hard for me to reach out and get help because for a good 6 months, I wanted to leave the relationship, but I had no money to leave the relationship. It was one big constant financial emergency after the other. And so I had to swallow my pride. I had to reach out to my dad and tell him the mess that I had gotten myself into. I think he suspected. I don't think he knew the depths that I had dug for myself financially. And I'm so very thankful that he didn't make me feel any worse than I already felt about it. He met me with a lot of understanding and sympathy, and yet he did not bail me out of my mess. He said, look, I'm not going to lend you money. I'm not going to pay your bills, but here's what I will do. I will give you a safe place to stay for free for a few months. I will sit down with you and I will help you put a plan together to get back on your feet. And that was exactly what I needed. And so that was a big slice of humble pie that I had to swallow, but I was ready to face my mess. And even though it sucked, that point where I decided to change directions, that I was sick and tired of where I was, that changed everything. Now, I like to tell people, you don't change your financial destination overnight, but you can change your direction.
Ooh, that's good. That's good.
And it honestly took me less time than I thought it would to get my finances cleaned up. Now, my credit score, it took a long time for that to recover. Um, However, I was pretty much out of debt within 2 years, which was better than I thought. Of course, it helped not having a grown man child that I was supporting. I was only responsible for myself, so, that made things a lot easier. But I started to get very curious about why smart people like me, why do we do dumb things with money? I would say 99% of the people who are listening to this, they know not to spend more money than they make. They know they shouldn't have excessive debt. They know that they should have some money in savings. And yet sometimes we don't do these things. And this was back in the early 2000s. This was, no one was talking about the psychology of money. No one was talking about behavioral finance. There were very few resources on that, and most of them were boring psychology books from most people's perspective. For me, it's strange because although I have an accounting degree, I have a minor in psychology because I've always been fascinated by psychology, and I took so many electives in psychology that I ended up getting a minor in psychology. And to me, that was very fascinating. But what I realized was the people who were teaching personal finance, the Dave Ramseys, the Susie Ormans, the way that they were teaching personal finance was more of like a checklist. Like, follow these 7 steps, do this checklist of things in this order. And if you do that, you're going to get this magical result. But what I realized is, even though we might know that we should be doing these things, and these are the right order to do these things in, that there are things that trip us up, and they have nothing to do with numbers. It has to do everything with emotions.
Yes, yes. I mean, back to your point on that, I think the checklist is great. It's great when you're doing a podcast or a radio show or a television show where you're talking to a very broad-based audience and saying, hey, here's the basics. But as you and I have discussed before, it's knowing the person you're sitting across from and knowing their personal situation and realizing it's not a one-shoe-fits-all mentality for what's happening in your own world.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting because I have people ask me a particular question all the time, and I tell them it's not the right question to be asking. And what they ask is, I know what I should be doing. Why can't I do it? What's wrong with me?
No.
And I said, that's the wrong question. What you should be asking is, what happened to me? What happened to me that is making me interact with my money in this way? Yeah. Because when we do something that is counter to common sense, that is a red flag or a spotlight should be, shined on that to say, there's something here that is deeper. And it might not even be a conscious thing. I had a client quite some time ago who she resisted saving money. And, she was coming out of a divorce, and, she had money in her checking account, but she said, I know I need money in savings. And I said, okay, well, step 0 is opening your savings account. So that's going to be your homework. Open your savings account. And when she came back to the next appointment, of course, I said, did you open the savings account? And she said, I couldn't. And I said, well, what do you mean you couldn't? And she said, I literally had a panic attack. She said, I knew I had an appointment at the bank. I was like trying to leave the house to go to it. And she said, I just felt this crushing wave of anxiety. And she said, I called and canceled the appointment. She said, I don't know what's wrong with me. And I said, well, there's nothing wrong with you. There's something that happened to you. And I just asked her a simple question. I said, was there ever a time in your life when it wasn't safe to save money? And she just sat there, and all of a sudden you could see that there was like this wave of recognition. And she said, I thought of something, but it's so dumb. And I said, no, it's not dumb. Just, tell me. And she said, well, when I was 6 years old, I had this red piggy bank. And whenever my parents would give me, money for my birthday or, my chores, picking up my toys, I would put my dollars or my quarters into this piggy bank. And her stepbrother was 9 years older than her. And one day she went to her piggy bank and it was empty.
Oh,
And her stepbrother had stolen her money, which was about $10. And she said, that's ridiculous. It was just $10. And I said, no. I said, to a 5-year-old, $10 is like $1,000,000. And this was someone who you trusted. And she said, well, my parents figured it out and they made him give me the money back. And I said, well, what did you do with that money when you got it back from him? And she said, well, I spent it. And I said, did you ever put any money back into that piggy bank? And she said, no. And I said, can you see why you feel unsafe to save money? And she's like, yeah, I can see
wow.
that. And it was just realizing that that was the root and giving her some mantras to say when she started to feel anxious, like, it's safe for me to save money. My money is safe in the bank. The next week she went out and she opened her savings account and she set up automatic transfers. But she had suppressed that. She didn't think that something that happened so long ago was affecting her. And it's like you said, those money stories, those money memories, they're real.
Yeah. And what a beautiful transition into money memories. I mean, so true. I mean, something that you have when you're younger, much like the piggy bank
Mhm.
story, that clearly she was holding so deep in her, in her psyche, and she didn't even realize it until she had that aha moment with you.
Yeah.
So when it comes to money memories, as we kind of discussed, what's a money memory that you've experienced as a younger person or as a teenager that helped mold your relationship to money as an adult? I mean, you shared with me kind of the late teens, early 20s-ish, but what was the triggering point when you were potentially younger that helped kind of get you on that path?
Yeah. I've got some good money memories and I've also got some not great money memories. One of my first money memories is of my dad teaching me about stocks. Now, I was about 5 or 6 years old, and my dad would always read the Wall Street Journal. And so I remember sitting on his lap and asking him what all these numbers meant. And so he picked a stock that he knew I would understand. And it was a hairdryer stock. So it must have been like Conair or something like that. And he explained to me that if a lot of people bought hair dryers, then it would make the stock go up. And if people didn't buy hair dryers, then the stock would come down. So once a week, I would sit on his lap and we would look at the price of this stock. And so to me, investing money never felt scary. It just felt very natural. And the way my dad explained it, it was like, well, no, if investing is simply buying into a company and when they sell more things, whatever it is they make, and they do better, then your investment goes up.
You are listening to the Platinum Talks Wealth Podcast.
Hey, it's Jennifer. I wanted to take a quick break to remind you that you are worthy to have a seat at the table when it comes to money and your finances. We, both me and my team at Platinum Wealth Management, want to meet you where you are, whether you're starting out, starting over, or have been investing for years. Reach out to us at platinumwealth.net or call us at 775-717-0001. We'd be honored to help.
And now, back to the podcast.
And to me, it was always a no-brainer of, well, of course you would invest. Like, why wouldn't you invest especially in a product that you like? But then I also had some not so great money memories. And I don't think it wasn't traumatic. I think it was just my parents trying to make sure that my brother and I were not irresponsible. But they would say things like, money doesn't grow on trees and you can't have everything you want.
Mm-hmm.
Just because you want it doesn't mean you can have it. And I did notice some of those things leaking into my adulthood, even when I could afford it. So, for example, one of the things that I caught myself doing, and I think this was, you know, back, I used to do a lot of couponing and discount shopping, etc. But then there came a point in my life to where I didn't have to do that. And I didn't want to identify with that anymore because I didn't need to. Um, but it was interesting because I found myself still going for the discounted thing. So, for example, if there was a purse that I wanted and I really wanted the red one, but the yellow one was on sale, I would buy the yellow one.
Interesting.
Even though
I get
even
that.
though it wasn't what I really wanted,
Yeah.
because I felt like it was too indulgent and I couldn't have everything that I wanted. And I finally had to, sit down and have the talk with myself and be like, Christine, this purse is $50 more for the red one that you really want. You remember the last time you did this, every time you looked at your yellow purse, you had this twinge in your gut that said, I should have got the red one. I liked the red one better. You know what I mean? But it was almost
Totally.
like,
I totally know.
it was that worthiness thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
You and
No.
I have talked about.
Yes. I resonate with that story so much because I've done the exact same thing. The exact same thing. And I feel like now, I mean, that even comes into me now, right? Being raised with my grandparents. I'm like, okay, like depression kids, saving money, doing all the things. I still have that moment. And it's funny because my husband's like, just buy it. And now I'm like, okay, I'm more open to spending money on experiences than I am stuff because I'm still like the coupon girl to a certain extent just because that's who I am. But like experiences, I don't bat an eye anymore. I'm like, yeah, do it. Let's go. Like, right. It
Yeah.
creates a memory. So I feel like we're all uniquely a work in progress to a certain extent because even though, we talk about money memories and does it serve you or do I change the narrative? Yes, but it's still always there. And you have to be really thoughtful of like, okay, yeah, I'm buying that damn black purse and it's amazing. And I'm not having
Yes.
the yellow one or the red one or whatever it is, right? Because that's the one you're going to use more and get more use of, enjoy more, and create some joy from it.
Yes. Yeah.
Such a good story. No, thank you for sharing. Like, just so good, so good. One thing I want to talk through too is, so we both work in finance, but we both do very different things. And so I want to differentiate kind of that as well. So you had
Yeah.
talked about kind of your own kind of money, self-proclaimed mess that you got yourself into and kind of navigated out of. Is that where people are coming to you saying, hey, I'm all over the board. I'm smart. I'm great at what I do, but I'm kind of a hot mess behind the scenes when it comes to like initially doing the basics. Is that what, go into a little more in detail if you don't mind there.
Yeah. Yeah. For some people, that's what it is. I jokingly say that most of my clients are high income, hot mess. So they have the income and they've been able to kind of be fast and loose with their money management because they make good money, but they've never really sat down and created a plan. They feel like budgeting is not something they have to do or something they want to do, probably because they've been traumatized by Dave Ramsey and they think that I'm going to have to give up Starbucks and I'm going to have to eat bean burritos from Taco Bell. That you and I both know that's not what it's all about.
Yeah, and give Dave a little credit, like, right? Like, because we do get referrals from Ramsey too. But to give him a little credit, I think he does a good broad-based education. However, it's back to the one-on-one with clients and realizing that it's not a one-shoe-fits-all. So back to really having that relationship, understanding what's going on. Like you're saying, like they could be making great money. Well, they checked a lot of boxes, but at the end of the day, they have to take a couple steps back to make sure they're doing the right things for themselves.
Yeah, and it's really about being intentional. One of the things that I do is I help my clients get organized. I get them set up on a personal finance app so we can see where everything is going. they have a lot of stuff going on. Many times they're a business owner, or maybe they're a doctor, or they own their own law practice. They've got a family, they've got multiple income streams, so they're spending money out of multiple bank accounts on multiple credit cards. So we really need that hub that is bringing everything all together so we can see exactly what they're spending on all the different areas. And I tell my clients, your money's job is to support your happiness. Money can't do its job unless you define what brings you happiness. And so you had talked about in our recent conversation, you have to come to the table with your goals. What are the things that really light you up? What are the things that are important to you? Many times when we start digging into the savings, it's not about me being the budget Nazi. It's me pointing out where money is leaking on things that aren't important to them. And let's redirect this to their important goals, because if they really want to be setting aside money for their kids' education and for their retirement, and someone like you tells them, okay, in order to make these goals happen, you need to be contributing X amount per month. And they're like, I don't know where this money's going to come from because, it comes in one door and then it goes out it goes out the back door every month, and I don't know where it all goes. Well, let's get in there and find out. Not because I want to put you on some super restrictive plan, but I want to make sure that we are getting every ounce of happiness juice out of your money as possible.
Two things on that. So I feel like the personal audit is huge, right? And that's where you're leaning the personal and maybe the business audit behind the scenes. Like how many Netflix prescription, I can't even talk today, goodness, Netflix subscriptions can you have? And I've had people with multiple ones when they really dig into it. So
Yeah.
really kind of looking at that and doing that self-audit, I think is so valuable. And then from that perspective, like you said, the relationship is not forever with you, right? You've said
Right.
that in the past. Whereas with me, it is. We want to be there to help, kids and grandkids and generational, and making sure you're doing the right things financially. Once you've done that personal audit and kind of cleaned up and making sure you have no happiness juice leaking out.
Yes.
Well, I will use that again. That's a good one.
That's the first time I've said it that way, so I'll be using that again too.
I like it. I like it. It's very relatable.
Yeah.
So from money memories, we also talk about financial infidelities, which I always say can be a big, hairy, scary, term by all means. What's an infidelity that you've either experienced or that you've witnessed that you think others could learn from along the way?
So mine was a little bit different because, my ex-fiance was very irresponsible with money. And so I lied to him about money and I hid money from him because if he knew I had money, he would find a way to wear me down and emotionally manipulate me to get that money.
Mhm.
And I knew that we would need that money for something coming up, whether it was bills or taking the cats to the vet or even just having a couple $100 in case of an emergency. I would squirrel money away and I would hide it from him. And if he would ask me, do you have any extra money? I would lie to him and I would say no. And the lesson to take from that is if you have to do that with your spouse, then there's a deeper problem than just the
Yeah.
money.
Huge. No, thank you for being raw and vulnerable and sharing that because, yeah, having that conversation of finances and being on the same page with your partner, so important. And again, I will preface, like there's folks that are like, nope, here's my money, here's his money. We meet in the middle with bills and whatever. And that's fine if that is how you do things. Or you have a sub account where that's where you pay things from and you have certain things separate. But make sure that you know what that looks like in your relationship and that you're on the same page. Like, are we sharing like everything? Is everything out there? Do we want to have a sub account? What does that look like ultimately? But being open and honest because money is challenging in relationships and can be one of the main causes for divorce next to other infidelities. just because of the honesty factor and not being on the same page there.
Yeah. And one of the things I love to say is that separate money is different than secret money.
Ooh.
You may decide as a couple to keep some money separate. Especially if you are in a second or a third marriage, you've got blended families, you've got estate planning considerations, etc. When I started dating my husband, Nick, I will just tell you straight up, one of the things that really was attractive to me is the fact that he has always been financially responsible and stable. I was like, oh, you max out your 401k. That's so hot. Yeah. So from the beginning, we had very open, honest discussions about money. And he was totally fine, especially at the beginning before we got married, about having separate accounts. And we've been married for 21 years and we've been together for 24 years. We still have some accounts that are separate, not because we are keeping secrets from each other. What we have found is if we agree on the big things, then there's really no need for us to split hairs over the little things. And what I mean by that is we know how much money needs to go into the joint account to pay the bills. And each of us have our separate spending money. As long as we're both putting in what needs to be put in to pay for the bills, I literally don't care what he spends his money on. And he doesn't care what I spend my money on. And that's very freeing. Now, all of our accounts have both of our names on them. There's just certain accounts that are primarily his that he uses, and ones that I primarily use. And when people say, like, what's the right answer? There is no right answer. It's what works for you.
Everybody's so different and same. So in my household with my husband, we do the exact same thing. So if he's buying a tiki mug or a sweater or whatever, like, good for him. Like, he works hard.
Yeah.
Like, do you, right? Same thing for me. Like, if I'm buying whatever, like, it's fine. But we do have access to see each other's everything. And we do have everything labeled under the same umbrella, but we have the sub accounts, like you had said. And again, there's no right or wrong on that. There's no hard definition of what that looks like. It's what works for your relationship. And again, just being open and transparent and honest of what that looks like, how you want to navigate that together. But being upfront, I think, is the most important thing.
Yeah, 100%.
Good. Well, as we wrap the conversation, one thing I like to ask is, how do you utilize money differently in your own household?
So the thing that is coming top of mind for me is my husband and I have our most important money discussions when we are taking walks around the neighborhood. And I suggest this to a lot of my clients. And the reason why is because it feels less confrontational than sitting across the kitchen table from each other, especially if there's a big pile of bills or a laptop in between you where you're looking at all the financial numbers. When you're outside in nature, it automatically dials down your stress. And I just find that as we walk, we are talking out the different financial decisions that we're making. It's also a great way to dream with your spouse about your financial future. We have had some of our best discussions on walks around the neighborhood, talking about money, talking about where do we want to move when my husband retires, because I want it to be someplace with no snow. So that is my tip. If you have a tough money discussion that you need to have with your spouse or your partner, try doing it over a walk. Here's the other thing too. If you guys get really mad at each other and you're a mile away from home, you've got a mile to work it back out before you get home.
You're in neutral space.
Yes.
Actually, no one has ever shared anything like that before. That's it. That's a really good one.
Awesome. Good.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for making time and chatting today. We'll have all your information in the show notes of how people can reach out to you and have a conversation and see if it's a good fit to work together and maybe clean up their hot money messes before they move forward with investing or whatever their journey looks like. So thank you again. And those of you listening or watching, hopefully you'll join us in the next Platinum Talks Wealth podcast.
If you enjoyed today's podcast, Platinum Talks Wealth, please subscribe and share. For more information about Jennifer Rogers Markwell or Platinum Wealth Management, please visit www.platinumwealth.net. Securities and advisory services offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor, member of FINRA and SIPC. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision. The guest speakers and their companies are not affiliated with or endorsed by LPL Financial or Platinum Wealth Management.